When the Parkers called me to babysit their son Ethan, I hesitated. They were new in town, and I'd only met them briefly when they moved into the old Victorian house down the street. The house had been vacant for years, its peeling paint and overgrown lawn a constant reminder of the town's ghost stories, but they offered double my usual rate, so I agreed. Ethan was 8, a quiet, polite kid with wide, curious eyes. When I arrived, Mrs. Parker handed me a long list of emergency numbers and said, "He's a good boy. You won't have any trouble." Her smile faltered as she glanced at Ethan. "Just don't let him go into the basement." I laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but her expression didn't change. "Mr. Parker added he's been having sleepwalking episodes. If you hear him wandering around, just make sure he stays upstairs." I nodded, brushing off their unease as first-time parent jitters. After they left, Ethan and I played cards in the living room, the flickering glow of the antique chandelier casting long shadows on the walls. He was quiet at first, but as the game went on, he started to open up. "Do you like this house?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He shrugged. "It's okay, but they don't like it when we move things." I paused, confused. "Who's they?" He looked down at his cards, his brow furrowing. "The others, they don't like change." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a smile. I decided not to press him. "Kids say weird things sometimes, right?" After dinner, I got Ethan ready for bed. His room was on the second floor, a cozy space filled with books and toys. As I tucked him in, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "If you hear them, don't look. Promise me." My stomach tightened, but I nodded. "I promise." By 9, the house was silent. I settled on the couch with a book, trying to ignore the creaks and groans of the old house. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, but I told myself it was nothing unusual. Then I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I called out, "Ethan?" No response. I climbed the stairs, my hand gripping the banister tightly. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from a nightlight in Ethan's room. I peeked inside, expecting to find him out of bed, but he was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The footsteps continued, but now they were coming from the far end of the hall. Near the door to the basement, Mrs. Parker's words echoed in my mind, "Don't let him go into the basement." I approached the door cautiously, the air growing colder with every step. The door was slightly ajar, revealing the top of a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I called out again, "Ethan? If you're there, come back to bed." A faint rustling sound drifted up from below. I should have closed the door and walked away, but something compelled me to look. I turned on the hallway light and stepped closer, my heart pounding in my ears. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. The air was damp and musty, and the single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast a weak, flickering light. The room was filled with old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs. I called out one last time, "Ethan, are you here?" A sudden crash echoed behind me, and I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. One of the boxes had toppled over, spilling its contents onto the floor. Photographs, old toys, and a small, cracked mirror. That's when I saw it. In the mirror's reflection, there was a figure standing at the foot of the stairs. It wasn't Ethan. It was tall and thin, its face pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow and dark. My breath caught in my throat as the figure tilted its head, watching me. I whipped around, but the stairs were empty. The mirror shattered as it hit the floor, the sound snapping me out of my trance. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut and locking it. My hands trembled as I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. Then I heard Ethan's voice. "They don't like it when you go down there." I turned to see him standing at the top of the stairs, his expression blank. I said, "Ethan, you shouldn't be out of bed." He shook his head slowly. "You woke them up." Before I could respond, a loud banging echoed from the basement door. The wood splintered as something pounded against it, the force shaking the entire frame. Ethan didn't move, his eyes fixed on the door. "We have to leave," I said, grabbing his hand. But he pulled away, his voice calm. "They won't let you." The banging stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything, but the house was still. Ethan turned and walked back to his room, leaving me frozen at the top of the stairs. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, clutching my phone, waiting for the Parkers to come home. When they finally arrived, I told them what had happened, expecting them to laugh or brush it off. Instead, they exchanged a look, Mrs. Parker said, "It's best not to go down there. They don't like strangers." I haven't been back to the house since. But sometimes when I pass by, I swear I see someone standing in the window, watching. When Mrs. Garcia asked me to babysit her son, Leo, she seemed nervous. I chalked it up to the usual anxiety parents feel about leaving their kid with someone new, but as she handed me a long list of instructions, I noticed her fingers trembling. She said, "Leo has a vivid imagination. If he mentions his friend Charlie, just play along, okay? It's harmless." I nodded, assuring her I'd handled plenty of kids with imaginary friends before, but the way her eyes lingered on mine, almost pleading, made my stomach twist. She added, "He'll be in bed by 8. Try to keep him there." As soon as she left, Leo appeared in the doorway to the living room. He was 5, small for his age, with big brown eyes that seemed too serious for a kid. He said Charlie doesn't like when Mommy leaves. I smiled, kneeling to his level. "Is Charlie your friend?" Leo nodded solemnly. He said, "He doesn't like strangers either." I tried to laugh it off. "Well, maybe I can make friends with Charlie too." Leo didn't smile. He just looked over his shoulder, like someone was standing behind him. The evening started off fine. We had macaroni and cheese for dinner, then colored at the kitchen table. Leo drew a picture of a tall figure standing next to a smaller one. Himself, I guessed. When I asked who the tall figure was, he said, "Charlie, he's watching us." The word sent a chill down my spine, but I forced a smile. "That's nice of him," I said. Leo frowned. "He doesn't like you." By bedtime, I was eager to get him tucked in. The house felt too quiet, the air heavy in a way I couldn't explain. I read Leo a story, kissed him on the forehead, and turned off the light. As I closed the door, he whispered, "You shouldn't go downstairs. Charlie doesn't like it." I ignored the comment, brushing it off as typical kid talk. Back in the living room, I settled onto the couch with my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly to distract myself. The house creaked with the usual sounds of settling wood and distant pipes, but every now and then I thought I heard something else. Soft footsteps, faint whispers. At first I convinced myself it was my imagination. But then I heard the thud. It came from upstairs, sharp and sudden, like something heavy hitting the floor. I jumped up, my heart pounding. I grabbed the flashlight Mrs. Garcia had left on the counter and made my way upstairs, each step slower than the last. Leo's door was open. I peeked inside, expecting to find him out of bed, but he was sitting on the mattress, his knees pulled to his chest. The lamp on his bedside table was on, casting long shadows across the room. I said, "Leo, are you okay?" He pointed to the corner. "He's mad," he whispered. I turned the flashlight toward the corner, but there was nothing there. Just a pile of stuffed animals and a small bookshelf. I told Leo, "There's nothing to be scared of," but my voice didn't sound convincing. Not even to me. As I tucked him back in, he grabbed my hand, his grip tight. He said, "He doesn't like when you talk to me. He wants you to leave." I stayed with him until he fell asleep, the weight of his words pressing on my chest. Back downstairs, the living room felt colder, the shadows darker. I turned on every light I could, hoping to banish the unease that clung to me. but the noises didn't stop. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though I couldn't make out the words. The footsteps seemed to echo through the house, always just out of reach. At one point, the kitchen light flickered, and I heard the faint sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I called Mrs. Garcia, my voice trembling as I told her what was happening. She sighed heavily and said, "I should have warned you. Leo's had a rough time since his dad left. He blames Charlie for everything." I asked her if she really thought it was just an imaginary friend, and she hesitated before saying, "It's best not to upset him. Just keep Leo safe." The call did nothing to calm my nerves. I returned to the couch, hugging a pillow to my chest, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. That's when I noticed the drawing. Leo's picture of Charlie was on the coffee table, but it was different now. The tall figure had moved closer to the smaller one, its hand resting on his shoulder. The lines were shaky, uneven, as if someone had drawn them in a hurry. I hadn't touched the picture, and I knew Leo hadn't left his room. The lamp flickered, and I heard the sound of small feet running down the stairs. I turned just in time to see Leo standing in the doorway, his face pale. He said, "He's coming." I grabbed his hand, pulling him close. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the hallway behind me. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming shapes that didn't make sense. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement, a tall figure shifting in the darkness. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into a low, guttural growl. I ran. I didn't stop. I scooped Leo into my arms and bolted out the front door, the sound of the growl following me until I was standing in the driveway. The house loomed behind us, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Mrs. Garcia came home 20 minutes later to find us sitting in my car. She looked at me, then at Leo and said, "He told you, didn't he?" I didn't know how to respond. She just shook her head and said, "He doesn't like strangers." I quit babysitting after that night. Babysitting for the Johnsons had always been easy money. Their daughter, Emma, was 7. A sweet, quiet kid who loved puzzles and drawing. The house was in a safe neighborhood, and they always came home on time. It was the perfect gig. That night started out no different. I arrived at 6, and Mrs. Johnson went over the usual instructions: dinner in the fridge, Emma's bedtime at 8:30, emergency numbers on the fridge. She said, "We should be back by midnight." Then she and Mr. Johnson headed out, leaving Emma and me alone. Emma was excited about a new puzzle she'd gotten, a 1,000-piece picture of a lighthouse. We spent the evening working on it together, the TV playing quietly in the background. By the time bedtime rolled around, we'd barely made a dent in the puzzle, but Emma didn't complain. She yawned, gave me a big hug, and went upstairs to get ready for bed. At 9, the house was quiet. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, the faint hum of the dishwasher in the background. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps on the front porch. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was too late for visitors, and the Johnsons hadn't mentioned expecting anyone. I glanced at the front door, but the peephole was too far away to check without getting up. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps. I told myself it was probably a neighbor, maybe someone needing help, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I got up slowly, my phone in my hand, and approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. No answer. I repeated the question, louder this time, but the only response was the sound of footsteps retreating down the porch. I waited a moment before looking out the peephole. The porch was empty. I locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt, and returned to the couch, trying to calm my nerves. It was probably a prank, I told myself. Some teenager messing around. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the knock was louder, more insistent. I jumped to my feet, my pulse racing. Emma's voice called from upstairs, "Who's that?" "Stay in your room," I shouted back, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I approached the door, my phone trembling in my hand. I said, "If this is a joke, it's not funny." The voice that answered made my blood run cold. "Is the lady of the house home?" It was a man's voice, deep and unfamiliar. I didn't respond. Instead, I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorknob jiggled, and I realized with a sickening lurch that he was trying to get inside. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to hit the right buttons. The operator answered, and I whispered, "Someone's trying to break into the house." "Please hurry." As I gave the address, the man outside spoke again. He said, "I know you're in there. Open the door or I'll make you." The operator told me to stay on the line and lock myself in a room. I ran upstairs to Emma's bedroom, locking the door behind me. Emma was sitting on her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" she asked. "It's okay," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's coming to help." The sound of shattering glass cut through the air, and Emma let out a small gasp. My stomach dropped. He was inside. I pressed the phone to my ear, whispering he just broke in. The operator's voice was calm, telling me the police were on their way, but it didn't feel fast enough. Every second stretched into an eternity as I listened to the sound of heavy footsteps downstairs. The footsteps grew louder, moving from room to room. He was searching for us. Emma clung to me, her small body trembling. I held her close, my mind racing. I glanced around the room, looking for anything I could use as a weapon, but the only thing within reach was a small metal lamp on her bedside table. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest as the doorknob rattled. He said, "I know you're in there. Open the door." His voice was low, almost a growl. I grabbed the lamp, holding it like a bat, and whispered to Emma, "Hide under the bed." She didn't argue. She slid under the bed, clutching her rabbit, her wide eyes peeking out at me. The door shook as he pounded on it, the wood splintering under the force. I backed against the wall, gripping the lamp so tightly my hands hurt. Then, suddenly, the pounding stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I held my breath, waiting for him to try again, but instead, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. They grew louder, closer, until red and blue lights flashed through the window. The footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of the front door slamming. I stayed where I was, clutching the lamp, until I heard the police shouting downstairs. It took me a moment to unlock the door and let them in. Emma crawled out from under the bed, her eyes filled with tears, and ran into my arms. The officers checked the house, but the man was gone. They found the broken window in the kitchen and muddy footprints leading out the back door. One of the officers said, "You're lucky you called when you did." I didn't feel lucky. Even after the police left, even after the Johnsons came home and thanked me profusely, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice. "I know you're in there. I haven't babysat since." Babysitting wasn't something I did often, but when the Hendersons asked me to watch their kids for the night, I couldn't say no. They lived a few blocks over in a big old Victorian house that always gave me a strange feeling, but the money was too good to pass up. When I arrived, Mrs. Henderson was rushing to get ready. She apologized for the mess, rattled off instructions, and told me the kids, Max, who was 6, and Lily, who was 9, should be in bed by 9. She said, "And if Lily talks about her new friend, don't worry. She's just going through a phase." I asked what she meant, but she waved me off, saying something about imaginary friends being normal at Lily's age. Before I could press further, she and her husband were out the door. The evening started off easy enough. We ordered pizza, played a few board games, and watched cartoons. Max fell asleep on the couch around 8:30, so I carried him upstairs to his room and tucked him in. Lily was quieter, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug and staring at something just beyond the TV. I asked her if she wanted to watch another show or read a book before bed, but she shook her head. She said he doesn't like stories. I paused. Who doesn't like stories? She turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. My friend. He doesn't like when I read before bed. I forced a smile, chalking it up to her imaginary friend. Oh, okay, well, it's bedtime, so let's head upstairs. She stood without a word and walked toward the staircase, but as I followed, I swear I saw her glance over her shoulder, like she was waiting for someone else to come too. Once she was settled in bed, I started to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a 9-year-old. Can you leave the light on? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course, I said. Do you need anything else? She hesitated, then said, if he talks to you, don't listen. He lies. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, patting her hand and telling her to get some sleep. As I left her room, I kept the hallway light on, just in case. By the time I got back downstairs, the house felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I heard the footsteps. They were soft at first, like someone walking barefoot across the hardwood floors. I assumed it was Max or Lily and called out, guys. You're supposed to be in bed. There was no answer. I got up and walked to the base of the stairs. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one room to the next. I called out again, Lily? Max? Still nothing. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was eerily quiet, the only light coming from the lamp outside Lily's room. I peeked inside. She was fast asleep, her small frame curled up under the covers. Max's room was the same, his gentle snores filling the air. The footsteps had stopped. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the old house settling. But as I turned to head back downstairs, something caught my eye. At the end of the hallway by the attic door, a shadow moved. It wasn't like the shifting of light or the play of shadows. It was deliberate, like someone stepping back out of view. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't just abandon the kids. Swallowing my fear, I crept toward the attic door. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until it felt like I was standing inside a freezer. The door was slightly ajar. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pushed it open. The attic stairs creaked under the weight of my touch, and a faint, musty smell wafted out. I called out, hello? My voice sounded weak, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Nothing. I was about to close the door when I heard a soft giggle. It was faint, almost like it was coming from inside my own head. My skin prickled as I backed away, slamming the door shut and locking it. I hurried downstairs, determined to stay there until the Hendersons came home. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The giggle echoed in my mind, and I kept glancing toward the staircase, half expecting to see a shadow or figure at the top. At exactly 11:15, the power went out. The TV flickered off, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. I was about to head upstairs to check on the kids when I heard it, a deep, guttural voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He's here. The words sent a chill down my spine. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand, but the room was empty. The voice came again, louder this time. You shouldn't be here. My breath caught in my throat as I backed toward the stairs. I had to check on the kids. I had to make sure they were okay. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I climbed, the darkness pressing in around me. When I reached the top, I found Lily standing in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered, "He's mad. He doesn't want you here." Before I could respond, A deafening bang echoed through the house, followed by the sound of the attic door crashing open. A cold wind swept through the hallway, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Lily grabbed my hand, her tiny fingers trembling. "Don't listen to him," she said. "He lies." I scooped her up and ran into Max's room, locking the door behind me. Max was sitting up in bed, his face pale and confused. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. I didn't know what to say. I just told them to stay close as I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The footsteps stopped outside, followed by a heavy silence. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, almost polite, but it quickly grew louder, more frantic, until the door rattled in its frame. A deep, guttural voice called out, "Let me in." The kids clung to me, their small bodies trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking ceased, and the house fell silent once more. When the Hendersons came home, the power was back on, and everything looked normal. I tried to explain what had happened, but they brushed it off, saying the house had always had strange quirks. Lily didn't say a word, but as I was leaving, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "Thank you." I haven't babysat since. There was something